Good afternoon and welcome to the weekly livestock market update. I'm Brownfield anchor reporter Megan Grevner with us as always to talk all things markets. University of Missouri's Scott Brown. Good afternoon, Scott.
Good afternoon, Megan.
A pretty busy week for us. I got to see you on Tuesday. We did a nice little market outlook at the Illinois Beef Association summer conference and got to talk and talk a little bit about questions or talk a little bit about markets and outlook, but also field some questions as well. So if you have them, you can always send them to Scott and I. We're happy to answer them. We're going to talk some trade data. We're going to talk supply and demand this week, as well as the retail and the consumer side of things. But to kick things off, let's recap what happened this week in the markets.
Yeah, Megan, this week in cattle markets, we were actually stronger. So live cash cattle were up nearly $2.70 this week. Those feeder cattle markets were anywhere from $3 to $6 higher on the week. On the future side, we also saw higher futures with the August live cattle futures contract up $2.35 and the August feeder cattle contract up a little more than 50 cents. On the box beef side, choice box beef prices were up nearly $4 this week. That still leaves them $67 below year-ago levels. We did see strength across the board in all of those components of the box beef this week. On the hog side, cash barrels and gilts were nearly 50 cents higher on the week, yet we saw those August lean hog futures continue to struggle this week, closed down nearly $4.30 on the week. The pork cutout value lost $1.40. Both hams and bellies were lower on the week.
Scott, let's talk slaughter numbers. We had a short week last week due to the holiday, rebounded a little bit this week and then some, especially on the cattle side of things.
That's right. A pretty good run of cattle this week. USDA reporting 674,000 head for the week ending June 11th. That's up 71,000 from a week ago. And again, last week was a shorter run, up 4,000 head from a year ago. On the hog side, a run of 2.372 according to USDA. That's up 328,000 head from a week ago, but was behind year-ago levels by 60,000 head.
When we look year-to-year comparison, how are we tracking percentage-wise for both cattle and hogs?
Yeah, so we're actually up on the cattle side, up about 1% year-to-date, and on the hog side, we're down 4.5%. When you and I first started talking about these year-to-date numbers, we were down a little harder on the hog side, but still, a 4.5% decline in hog slaughter. We don't see that very often in the last few years. So a marked change for sure.
Maybe we talk about this a little bit more next week. We have a pretty busy schedule today, and we're not as many reports, actually no reports next week as we look ahead. But I think we should probably talk a little bit about capacity on the slaughter side of things and how things are reflecting in really what we're seeing numbers wise as well, because I think it's an interesting conversation to have. It's kind of related.
Yeah. So for sure, I think it's going to be interesting here to get to the end of June and talk about a hogs and pigs report. Are we going to be down still pretty hard in terms of breeding inventory? What's market hog inventory look like? I hear some PRRS issues in some parts of the country continuing. And so I don't know how big the runs of hogs need to be, but you're correct to say capacity matters here, and it's more labor capacity than it is shackle space capacity, given what we know today.
Trade data, monthly trade data came out this week. As we take a look at these numbers, gosh, beef exports really are kind of the shining star in this whole scheme of things.
Yeah, that's right. And I'll say it's a little bit of tale of two cities when you look at beef versus pork. But on the beef side, beef exports in April, 304 million pounds. That was up 6% from last year. When you look at the value, it's up more than 30% relative to a year ago. Year to date, beef exports 1.15 billion pounds. Just a point of comparison, in 2019, so kind of get pre-COVID, we were setting at 943 million pounds year to date. So really strong growth, 20+%. China's been part of that story on the beef side for sure. We'll hope that continues as we look ahead. On the pork side, 529 million pounds of pork exported in April. That's down nearly 20%, and just as positive for beef is China, the negative for pork is China. We're talking about pork exports year to date at 2.1 billion pounds. We were at nearly 2.6 billion pounds by this time a year ago. So down relative to a year ago by nearly 20% on the pork side.
When we look at these numbers, I know we talk about year ago comparisons. You brought up 2019 pre-COVID numbers in terms as we talk about the beef side of things. Does the pork, the drastic increase in demand for pork that we saw in 2020 and 2021, is it kind of offset? Are we more just kind of a normal year without those two outliers, if you take out those two outliers?
So I think you're wise to say that. So ASF mattered here is the bottom line. And exports of pork to China in a year like 2020 and 2021 even were quite phenomenal. And really them trying to replace some supplies they were lacking due to ASF. When you look at their 2022 pork production, it's nearly, according to them, nearly back to 2018 levels, so kind of pre-ASF, if you will. And that's really reduced their interest in some U.S. pork. Do I think we have a chance to grow that market looking ahead? So I keep saying yes to that, but I would be cautious about repeating what we did in 2020 in particular. I think it's slower growth ahead as they are coming out of their COVID-19 lockdowns. I think there's an opportunity maybe for a little more product, but it's going to be a slower road there. And this is where we can go, thank goodness for Mexico, right? That's been the market that's been so strong for us, helping offset some of the downside that we see coming from China at this point.
Retail prices. Oh, no. I'm jumping ahead. I'm sorry. Supply and demand big report out today. Talk to me a little bit about those numbers and your takeaways from that report from USDA.
Yeah. So first of all, I'll say it was a pretty quiet report generally in my book from a livestock perspective or a crop price perspective for the 2022 projections. So the year we're in. USDA did raise red meat production about 150 million pounds. They raised net exports by about a similar amount. So we really didn't see much change in overall domestic availability, if you will. They did a little change around the edges in terms of prices, but no real big changes there either. Modest, a nickel increase in corn and $5 increase in soybean meal for the current year that we're in. And when you look at what they're saying for 2023, it was really no change in terms of what was in that livestock SNU.
Retail prices. I think this is probably the most interesting thing we're going to talk about this week, and not for good reasons. As we take a look at this, prices are going up. And I think there's just no way around it.
So yes. You're going to make me start differently than I otherwise might have in response to that.
No, let me take that back a second. Because as we talk about prices overall, yes, they're going up, and I'm looking ahead to consumer sentiment and thinking about that. But as we look at retail prices, I guess kind of interesting when we're looking month to month at prices.
So for sure, you look at that choice beef retail price. We actually lost 6 cents, which we're gonna. Well, I should be careful, but we'll take the wins where we can. Lower retail prices probably helps in the inflationary period that we're in. But I'll still go back to say, we get into October, November, December. Don't be surprised for the CPI for food to begin to slow a lot relative to what we saw from BLS today in that report. And I say that only because the base is going to be higher. We got higher retail prices in the latter part of 2021, so that's going to help reduce the percentage growth. Now, it's when you look at beef, yes, again, down slightly relative to the previous month, but still 10% above year ago. Pork retail price 11% above year ago. It was unchanged relative to April and May. However, here's one on the pork side where I will say, when you look at some of the specials being run in the grocery store today, if there's likely to be a feature on the meat side, it's likely pork. Pork loin, I've seen some pretty good values sitting there in the grocery store. USDA AMS actually gives us a little bit of that information. And so if, and kind of maybe I'm jumping ahead now as well about consumer sentiment, but if the economy were to turn south and we talk about a recession, the meat that might be better positioned from a being cheaper standpoint is cuts of pork like pork loin, like shoulder roast, etc.
Do you almost call it a loss leader to get folks into the store?
So perhaps I sometimes say maybe you chalk it up to consumers aren't so sure how to cook some of those products anymore, so they don't see the value. Perhaps COVID helped with that a little bit, learning how to better use those. Again, I will say part of this is we consume so much meat away from home today. We don't tend to go to the grocery store like we did in the past. And I think that has something to do with why those prices for some of those pork cuts are lower. If we were to find an outlet for away from home outlet, if you will, for some of those pork products, maybe they wouldn't be quite as inexpensive as we see them today.
Consumer sentiment. I think this is where we end today. And I will say, I think it's interesting. We're going to talk consumer sentiment. Purdue University released their ag economy barometer this week as well, and it showed a sharp decline. How does this come into play in the overall consideration with the broader economy?
Well, we are sure getting more signals that consumers are worried about where the general economy is headed. All right, so the June consumer sentiment index fell 14% relative to May is the data we have, and that's, Megan, not to sneeze at, a 40% decline relative to a year ago. Consumers worried about high gas prices, worried about inflation. I think that has a lot to do with the numbers that we're getting out of that consumer sentiment report today.
When you look at the ag, just if we're going to talk big picture, right? And I think about it in terms of producers, farmers are consumers as well. Does it hit a little bit differently, knowing what they're seeing on the ag side of things and the uncertainty there, and then seeing the broader economy and the broader impacts of inflation in their purchasing for their personal goods as well? So it's kind of a double whammy, so to speak.
So perhaps, and especially for livestock producers, where you might be worried inflation stops consumers from buying their products, and at the same time they're paying more for almost every input they have. I will keep saying my concern here is the sheer number of dollars it takes to produce, say, 100 pounds of beef or 100 pounds of pork or an acre of corn has gone up so much, yet the margin hasn't probably moved all that much. So although revenue's gone up, costs have gone up as well. That kind of puts more risk on the financial bottom line for some of the operations that we have out here today. And that's one of my concerns about that added risk to the bottom line that comes with these higher input costs.
Scott, anything else this week?
I think we covered a lot of ground. I don't think there's anything else to cover this week.
All right. We will see you next Friday. No reports next week, which means I get to throw all the curveballs at you for about 20 minutes in the afternoon.
And I'll do the best I can to hit them out of the park.
All right. Great to see you. We will see you next Friday.
Sounds good, Megan.
So have our weekly livestock market update delivered to your email box every Saturday morning. Go to brownfieldagnews.com. You can also submit questions and comments if you'd like. And if you'd like to see some more conversations about commodity markets, check out Ben Brown and Will Robinson's weekly commodity market update on Tuesday afternoons, also at brownfieldagnews.com. Have a great weekend. I'm Megan Grebner for Brownfield.